Every morning we're encouraged when we wake up to set our motivation to not harm and to benefit beings, and then develop this mind of awakening. And in thinking about not harming, one of our main precepts is not to kill, to protect life, and that means not to even physically harm beings. It's not just a matter of not killing, it's not to physically harm beings. And also, I think we've been very well instructed to try to separate out the person from the behavior. So when people do, in particular, I was responding to an execution that happened recently, and that's what this BBC is about. So this person did a horrific crime. I don't think there was any doubt about that. But we're taught to separate out the person from their behavior. And this can be really put to the test when it comes to some kind of horrific act like that. And so, yes, the behavior could be, I like the word deplorable. It could be atrocious, it could be wrong. But the person still has human dignity that is to be respected. And that's my thought. And then I thought, well, what is human dignity? And it turns out that there's a lot said about that, and it's said in many different ways by different people, depending on what walk of life you're from, whether you're in the law or in the Catholic Church. It has a lot to say about that. But it does relate to a sense of self-respect, of self-worth, of physical and psychological integrity and empowerment, both for an individual or for a group. And it's intended to have a unifying effect on our ethical, legal, and political practices. So Angela Merkel said this in a way that I think really resonates with me, which is that when it comes to human dignity, we cannot make compromises. And last time I did a BBC, I did one on compassionate release of inmates when they're about to die. And in that, I learned of Nancy Gertner, who was a retired federal judge and a Harvard law professor. And she also said something that really sticks with me, which is, she said, the quality of a society is measured by how we deal with the least fortunate. And the people in our prisons, she considers to be the least fortunate. And she says, this is a measure of our humanity. So in my view, there was a failure of this. I think this was on the 10th of September of this month. I read an article in the USA Today about a Tennessee inmate the headline was, Tennessee inmate's execution was torture, experts say in new court filings. And the person who wrote the article is one of 7 state-required media witnesses at this man's execution. And I guess that's just the way they do it. They have to be there. So the background to this is that there's an ongoing legal battle in Tennessee regarding their lethal injection protocol. And this man, Billy Ray Irick, and 22 other inmates, death row inmates, have sued the state, and they're arguing for a different protocol. They're not arguing against the death penalty, they're arguing for how it's carried out. Because they're saying it would subject them to pain so intense that it would violate the US Constitution, and they question the use of this certain drug that was used, and then it's followed by 3 other drugs. And then the person who heard this, David County Chancery Court Judge Ellen Hobbs Lyle. This judge agreed that the expert that was presenting was the expert and was qualified in this and that, but she rejected their arguments of these inmates. She said, whatever pain the inmates felt did not last long enough to count as an unconstitutional torture. And this stance was blasted by the U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor in an opinion right before this man's death. But she did not prevail. She was a dissenting voice. So they did not stop, the U.S. Supreme Court did not stop his execution. But what this judge, U.S. Supreme Court judge said was that we have accepted barbarism. She said, in refusing to grant Irick a stay, the court today turns a blind eye to a proven likelihood that the state of Tennessee is on the verge of inflicting several minutes of torturous pain on an inmate in its custody, while shrouding his suffering behind a veneer of paralysis. I cannot in good conscience join in this rush to execute without first seeking every assurance that our precedent permits such results. If the law permits this execution to go forward in spite of the horrific final minutes that Eric may well experience, then we have stopped being a civilized nation and accepted barbarism. And I want to talk about this because I want to bear witness to this man's death and to this situation. When I read the paper, the description of what went on, I had nightmares that night. I have worked in my job with people who are paralyzed, and I remember a co-worker of mine worked with a woman who had what they call locked in, where she had a spinal injury so high that the only thing that worked really were her eyes. She couldn't speak, couldn't do anything. She was paralyzed. And I've met people who have had Lou Gehrig's disease, ALS. Their minds are crystal clear, but they cannot move. They lose all their muscle power, and they finally are just kind of locked in. And this is, I think, what happened to this man. This drug and they didn't even do the procedure, their own procedure they didn't do right. They were supposed to have a second injection ready. They taped the fingers down so they can't move. So any signs that anyone might have any pain wouldn't be registering. When you read the article, it's just so clear that the people who witness this think that the final minutes are horrific, and the drug essentially, these things they inject essentially destroy your lungs, so you're like drowning to death while you're aware of it. And it's just horrible. So I think that at the minimum, we have to bear witness to what this happened, and we have to be a voice for human dignity. What we can do in our small way, for me, it's just a matter of making this known. Anyone who knows anyone needs to do something. They'll carry on their case, and there's people, I'm sure, that are concerned about this, but we have to be informed. We can't let these things go. This is too far. And like many people, it's difficult to represent yourself, I think, when you're in a prison system, and they need help from the outside. We are the people who can help. Anyone who hears this, who has any way to help people in this situation, this is a measure of who we are as human beings. So it wasn't something I wasn't really planning on doing 2 BBCs on prison things in a row, but when I read this, it was more than I could let go. I think it's important to recognize that this happened to this man, and that this is their way they're doing this in this state, and anything we can do to prevent this is something we should do. So thank you. This is our task, not to harm, to try to help sentient beings. This is our practice. So may we take it to this particular situation in any way that we can.